What happens when Hollywood's most respected legend sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to face the most disrespectful host in television history? It only took 47 seconds for Jimmy Kimmel to destroy his own career with one comment that crossed every line imaginable. Before we dive into this shocking confrontation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about how this all went down. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday evening as Clint Eastwood walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. The audience erupted in applause for the legendary actor and director. At 89 years old, Eastwood still commanded respect wherever he went. His weathered face told stories of decades in Hollywood. From his early westerns to his Academy Award-winning films, Jimmy Kimmel bounced onto the stage with his usual fake energy, that practiced smile plastered across his face. He shook Eastwood's hand with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that immediately felt wrong. You could see it in Eastwood's eyes, that slight squint that meant he was already reading the room. "Clint Eastwood, everybody!" Kimmel shouted to the crowd, milking their applause. "The man, the myth, the legend." Eastwood settled into the guest chair, his posture straight and dignified. He wore a simple black suit, no flashy jewelry, no designer nonsense, just class personified. The contrast with Kimmel's shiny suit and overdone hairdo couldn't have been more obvious. "So Clint," Kimmel began, already leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, "you've been making movies for what, like 100 years now?" The audience chuckled, but Eastwood's expression didn't change. "Well, not quite that long, Jimmy. Close enough though, right?" Kimmel pressed on, completely missing the subtle warning in Eastwood's tone. "I mean, you started back when movies were still in black and white. That must feel ancient to you now." There it was, the first jab, disguised as a joke but clearly meant to make Eastwood look old and irrelevant. The legendary actor just nodded slightly, choosing his words carefully. "I've been fortunate to work in this industry for many decades, yes." Kimmel wasn't satisfied with that diplomatic answer. He wanted blood. "But seriously, don't you ever think about just, hanging it up, enjoying retirement, maybe taking up golf full-time?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they expected from a late-night talk show. This felt mean-spirited. Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I enjoy what I do, Jimmy. I don't see any reason to stop as long as I'm healthy and passionate about filmmaking." "But come on," Kimmel continued, his voice getting that whiny edge it always got when he thought he was being clever. "Surely, there comes a time when you have to admit the younger generation knows better, right? Like, maybe your time has passed?" The studio went quiet. Even Kimmel's own band looked uncomfortable behind their instruments. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was just cruel. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but with steel underneath. "I think experience and wisdom have value in any profession. Age doesn't automatically make someone irrelevant." "Well, sure, but..." Kimmel smirked, thinking he had the upper hand. "Your movies aren't exactly setting the box office on fire these days. Maybe audiences just want something more? And current? That hit different." Eastwood had just directed and starred in several critically acclaimed films, earning praise from critics and audiences alike. The suggestion that his work was somehow outdated or unsuccessful was not just wrong, it was deliberately insulting. "My recent films have been well received, both critically and commercially," Eastwood replied, his tone still measured but cooling noticeably. Kimmel waved his hand dismissively. "I mean, they're fine for what they are. Very traditional. But don't you think Hollywood needs fresh blood? New perspectives? Maybe it's time for the old guard to step aside?" The audience was dead silent now. You could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. Eastwood's legendary composure was being tested by this smug host who clearly had no respect for the man sitting across from him. "Fresh perspectives are always welcome," Eastwood said carefully. "But dismissing experience and proven talent based solely on age seems short-sighted." Kimmel laughed, that fake television laugh that grated on everyone's nerves. "Oh, come on, Clint. You can't tell me you think your westerns and tough guy movies are still relevant in 2024. We've moved past all that macho nonsense, haven't we?" There it was, the direct attack on everything Eastwood had built his career on, calling his iconic roles and groundbreaking films nonsense. The insult hung in the air like poison. Eastwood's eyes narrowed to those famous slits that had intimidated countless bad guys on screen. "I think there's always a place for stories about honor, courage, and doing what's right. Those aren't outdated concepts. But that whole strong, silent type thing," Kimmel pressed on, oblivious to the danger he was walking into, isn't that kind of toxic masculinity by today's standards? Shouldn't we be teaching men to be more sensitive? The question was loaded with condescension and modern buzzwords designed to make Eastwood look like a relic from a less enlightened time. But the legendary actor wasn't about to let some late-night television host lecture him about masculinity or morality. "I think strength and sensitivity aren't mutually exclusive," Eastwood replied, his voice getting quieter, which anyone who knew him understood was a warning sign. A man can be both strong and compassionate. That's what real character looks like. Kimmel rolled his eyes dramatically for the cameras. Sure, but let's be honest here. Your characters are basically all the same guy, right? Squinty, gruff, shoots first, and asks questions later. It's pretty one-dimensional when you really think about it. The insult was staggering in its ignorance and disrespect. Eastwood had created some of cinema's most complex and nuanced characters, from the conflicted Harry Callahan to the aging gunfighter in Unforgiven. To reduce decades of masterful acting to a cartoon, stereotype showed either complete ignorance or deliberate malice. Eastwood sat back in his chair, studying Kimmel with the kind of intense focus that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected directors. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of excellence. "I think my body of work speaks for itself, Jimmy." But Kimmel wasn't done. He had tasted blood and wanted more. The smirk on his face grew wider as he prepared to deliver what he thought would be his killing blow. "Does it, though?" Kimmel shot back, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I mean, when was the last time you made anything that actually mattered? Something that changed the conversation? Your last few movies were just okay. Pretty forgettable, really." The audience collectively held its breath. Even the camera operators seemed uncomfortable behind their equipment. This had gone way beyond normal talk show, ribbing into something ugly and personal. Eastwood's hands remained perfectly still on the armrest of his chair, but his knuckles had gone white. "I'm proud of my recent work. The critics and audiences seem to appreciate it as well." "Critics, sure," Kimmel waved dismissively, "but they're just being polite to a legend, right? Nobody wants to be the guy who says Clint Eastwood made a bad movie. It's like criticizing someone's grandfather." The comparison was deliberate and cruel, reducing one of cinema's greatest artists to a doddering old relative who deserved pity rather than respect. Eastwood's jaw clenched visibly. "I don't make films for pity, Jimmy. I make them because I have stories to tell." Kimmel leaned forward with that predatory gleam in his eyes. "But are they stories anyone actually wants to hear anymore? I mean, let's be real. The world has changed. Your generation's values, your way of thinking, it's all pretty dated now, isn't it?" There was something particularly vicious about the way Kimmel said, "your generation," like he was talking about ancient history, rather than addressing someone who was still actively creating art at the highest level. Eastwood's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more powerful than any shout. "What exactly are you trying to say, Jimmy?" For a split second, even Kimmel seemed to realize he might be pushing too far. But his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of his audience, not when he thought he had the upper hand against Hollywood royalty. "I'm saying, maybe it's time to admit that your time has passed," Kimmel said, his voice getting shriller. "Maybe the industry would be better off if some of the old dinosaurs stepped aside and let fresh talent take over." The word dinosaurs hung in the air like a slap. Eastwood had built his career on respect, professionalism, and treating people with dignity. Now this television host was calling him extinct to his face on national television. "Dinosaurs," Eastwood repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. "Well, yeah," Kimmel doubled down, completely misreading the moment. "I mean, you guys from the old days, you had your run, but Hollywood needs to evolve, right? We need voices that understand modern audiences, modern problems, not the same old cowboy fantasies." The band members behind Kimmel were looking at each other with obvious concern. The audience had gone completely silent, sensing that something was about to explode. Even the usually oblivious studio audience could feel the tension crackling through the air. Eastwood stood up slowly from his chair. At his full height, even at 89 years old, he commanded the room in a way that made Kimmel suddenly look very small behind his desk. "You know what, Jimmy?" Eastwood said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of controlled fury. "I've been in this business for over 60 years. I've worked with legends, I've directed masterpieces, and I've earned the respect of my peers through hard work and dedication." Kimmel tried to interrupt with a weak laugh. "Hey, I didn't mean to." "No, let me finish." Eastwood cut him off, and the authority in his voice made Kimmel shrink back in his chair. "I've been insulted by better men than you, and I've forgotten more about filmmaking than you'll ever know. But what bothers me isn't your ignorance about my work or your casual dismissal of my generation. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Eastwood took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, and the host visibly flinched. What bothers me is your complete lack of respect. Not just for me, but for this industry that gave you everything you have. You sit behind that desk making jokes about people who paved the way for you to even exist. Kimmel's face had gone pale. The cocky smirk was completely gone now, replaced by the look of someone who suddenly realized they had picked a fight with the wrong person. "Clint, I was just," Kimmel stammered. "You were just what?" Eastwood's voice was getting quieter, more dangerous. "Just being disrespectful? Just trying to get laughs at my expense? Just showing your audience how clever you think you are by tearing down someone who's accomplished more in one decade than you'll manage in your entire career?" The cameras kept rolling, capturing every word of what was becoming a legendary television moment. Kimmel looked desperately toward his producers off stage, but no one was coming to save him from the hole he had dug himself into. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Kimmel tried weakly. "No misunderstanding at all," Eastwood replied. "You invited me here to promote my work, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to humiliate me. You've called my career irrelevant, my values outdated, and me a dinosaur. You've shown nothing but contempt for my life's work." Eastwood paused, letting his words sink in. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Kimmel squirmed in his chair, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. "But here's what really gets me, Jimmy," Eastwood continued, his voice now carrying the weight of righteous anger. "You think because you have a television show and a captive audience, you can say whatever you want without consequences. You think you can tear people down for entertainment and never have to answer for it?" Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Eastwood held up a hand, stopping him cold. "I've met men like you before. Small men who try to make themselves feel bigger by cutting others down. The difference is, most of them had the sense to keep their mouths shut when they were out of their depth." The studio felt like a powder keg about to explode. Kimmel's face had gone from pale to red, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling under the weight of Eastwood's withering assessment. But instead of backing down or apologizing, Kimmel made the fatal mistake that would end his career. "Oh, come on," Kimmel said, his voice cracking with nervous laughter. "You're being way too sensitive here, Clint. Can't take a joke anymore? Maybe that's another sign that you're past your prime." The words hit the studio like a thunderclap, even suggesting that Clint Eastwood, the man who had faced down every challenge Hollywood could throw at him, was being too sensitive was beyond insulting. It was professional suicide. Eastwood went completely still, the kind of stillness that came before violence in his movies. When he spoke, his voice was so low that the microphones barely picked it up, but every word carried the force of a sledgehammer. "Too sensitive," he repeated, and somehow those two words contained more menace than any threat. Kimmel realized too late that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. The smug confidence drained from his face as he watched Eastwood's expression harden into something truly frightening. "You think I'm being too sensitive," Eastwood continued, taking another step closer to the desk. "Let me tell you something, Jimmy. I've been shot at by real bullets making movies. I've worked 18-hour days in 100-degree heat and freezing rain. I've directed films while dealing with studios that wanted to destroy everything I believed in." His voice began to rise, each word hitting harder than the last. "I've earned every ounce of respect I have through blood, sweat, and decades of work. And you think calling me a dinosaur, dismissing my life's work, and questioning my relevance is just a joke?" Kimmel tried to interrupt again, but Eastwood's voice cut through the air like a knife. "No, Jimmy, you don't get to talk anymore. You've said enough." The audience was frozen in their seats, witnessing something that would be talked about for years. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was justice. "You want to know what's really past its prime?" Eastwood asked, his voice now filled with controlled fury. "It's this whole culture of tearing people down for laughs. It's hosts like you who think being cruel makes you clever. It's the idea that disrespect is entertainment." Eastwood reached the edge of Kimmel's desk and leaned down, his face inches from the terrified host. "You called me a dinosaur, Jimmy, but dinosaurs were magnificent creatures that ruled their world for millions of years. What are you? Just another forgettable television host who will be replaced next season when your ratings drop." Kimmel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. The man who made a living with words had been struck completely speechless. "Here's what's going to happen," Eastwood said, straightening up to his full height. "I'm going to walk off this stage. I'm going to leave you sitting here looking like the small, petty man you've shown yourself to be. And tomorrow, everyone will remember this moment not as the night Jimmy Kimmel took down Clint Eastwood, but as the night Clint Eastwood exposed Jimmy Kimmel for what he really is. The studio was dead silent, except for the hum of the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of Kimmel's humiliation. You think experience doesn't matter? You think age makes someone irrelevant? Eastwood's voice rose to a level that filled every corner of the studio. Let me show you the difference between a professional and a pretender. Without another word, Eastwood turned his back on Kimmel and began walking toward the edge of the stage. Each step was deliberate, dignified, powerful. He wasn't running away. He was making a statement. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a pathetic squeak. "Clint, wait, please. Let's just..." Eastwood stopped and turned back one final time. The look on his face was one of complete disgust and disappointment. "You know what the real tragedy is, Jimmy? You had a chance to sit across from a legend. You could have learned something. You could have shown some class. Instead, you chose to be small." He paused, letting that sink in, before delivering his final devastating blow. "In 30 years, nobody will remember your name or your show, but they'll still be watching my movies and learning from my work. That's the difference between building something that lasts and just making noise." With that, Eastwood walked off the stage, leaving behind a stunned audience and a completely destroyed host. Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. The cameras kept rolling, capturing his complete breakdown in real time. The audience began to murmur, then applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation for the man who had just schooled their host in dignity and professionalism. Even Kimmel's own band was clapping. As the applause continued, Kimmel looked directly into the camera with the expression of a man who knew his career was over. He had picked a fight with Hollywood royalty and been absolutely destroyed. The man who had spent years making fun of others had just been given a taste of his own medicine, and he couldn't handle it. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In 47 seconds of pure stupidity, Jimmy Kimmel had managed to insult one of the most respected figures in entertainment history, and then compound that mistake by calling him too sensitive when confronted with his own cruelty. Clint Eastwood had walked onto that stage as a guest promoting his latest film. He walked off as a legend who had just delivered one of the most devastating put-downs in television history. He had shown the world that real power doesn't need to shout or threaten. Sometimes it just needs to stand up, speak the truth, and walk away with dignity intact. The man who had made his name playing tough guys had just proven that sometimes being tough means knowing when someone isn't worth your time.